Welcome back. Today I'll be sharing about David Walker, and I'm reading directly from the Boston African American National Historic Site. Born to a free mother and an enslaved father around 1796, this would make him what? Slavery came along the mother's line, free, right? David Walker grew up free in Wilmington, North Carolina. Though never enslaved, Walker certainly witnessed the horrors of slavery and experienced racism in his hometown, as well as in his later travels throughout the country. By 1825, however, Walker had settled in Boston and soon married Eliza Butler. He quickly established himself as both a business leader and a prominent community activist. He first resided on South Ave, now Phillip Street, then later moved to Belknap, now Joyce Street, on the north slope of Beacon Hill. He operated a used clothing store on Battle Street. As a member of the black community on Beacon Hill, Walker joined the Methodist May Street Church and became a close associate of its activist minister, Reverend Samuel Snowden. He also participated in the Prince Hall Masons, a black fraternal order formed in Boston. Additionally, Walker served in the Massachusetts General Colored Association, considered to be the first black abolitionist organization. This group dedicated itself to the abolition of slavery and an end to discrimination, as well as promoted the intellectual and moral improvement of African Americans throughout the nation. Walker also became a principal agent for Freedom's Journal, the first black newspaper published in the United States. Walker realized the power of the written word to create change, whether through newspapers such as Freedom's Journal or through political pamphlets. This realization likely inspired him to write his appeal to the colored citizens of the world, published in 1829. Walker's appeal urged black resistance to slavery and racism. He unsparingly attacked slavery's defenders, including enslavers themselves, the government, and churches. Walker filled his appeal with biblical, classical, and other historical references, which led some to question the authorship of his work. Of course, because they're so silly they can't think a black man could be brilliant. In his appeal, Walker offered a scathing critique of American slavery and the racism that undergirded it. He criticized members of the founding generation, including Thomas Jefferson, for their hypocrisy and racist ideology, and for failing to practice the principles they set forth in the Declaration of Independence. Walker also went after supporters of the colonization movement who wanted to rid the country of free blacks by sending them to Africa. In this radical abolitionist pamphlet, Walker sought to claim black people's place in the American Republic, not abandon or overthrow it. In one of the more controversial passages of his work, he urged militant resistance if all else failed. The appeal was written to be read aloud to groups of both free and enslaved African Americans. Walker hoped to inspire people to action. His appeal caused huge controversy and fear when copies began to appear in the South, carried there by sailors. Southern leaders worried of potential uprising fomented by this pamphlet. For example, when confronted with copies of the appeal in his city, the mayor of Savannah, Georgia, wrote Boston Mayor Harrison Gray Otis asking him to investigate Walker. Though Otis found the pamphlet, quote, extremely bad and inflammatory, end quote, he told his counterpart in Savannah that he couldn't do anything about it. Freedom of press, freedom of speech. Abolitionists, on the other hand, took great inspiration from Walker's work. William Lloyd Garrison, who published several articles about the appeal in the early editions of his paper, The Liberator, wrote, It breathes the most passionate and determined spirit. Frederick Douglass later said the Walker's appeal, quote, startled the land like a trump of coming judgment, end quote. Walker died shortly after the publication of his appeal, leading some to speculate that he may have been killed. However, official records noted his cause of death as consumption, which also took the life of his daughter around the same time. His remains are buried in an unmarked grave in South Boston. The Boston Recorder simply reported his death as, quote, David Walker, 33, the colored man who wrote the pamphlet on slavery, which caused such alarm in the slave-holding states, end quote. His friends and admirers, however, remember him more robustly. Activist and orator Maria Stuart referred to him as, quote, most noble, fearless, and undaunted, end quote, leader who distinguished himself the most in these modern days by acting wholly in defense of African rights and liberty. Abolitionist Henry Highland Garnet wrote in 1848, before the Anti-Slavery Reformation had assumed a form, he was ardently engaged in the work. His hands were always open to contribute to the wants of the fugitive. His house was the shelter and home of the poor and needy. Mr. Walker is known principally by his appeal, but it was in his private walks and by his unceasing labors in the cause of freedom that he has made his memory sacred. David Walker. So I'll continue by reading directly from David Walker's work in another video. Tell me what you think. Thanks so much for listening.